Welcome to the Contrarians, and tonight we are getting philosophical. We are looking at bands that have created something or anything approaching a life philosophy for you. So without any further ado, let's get started. This is a pretty wild episode, so get ready. Contrarians, and tonight we have an episode that our own very own Martin Popoff came up with. In fact, I'm going to throw it over to him, but I do want to welcome our panel tonight. Philip and the Parish of Rock is here, and I do believe Rand Kelly should be here in a minute, but we're going to get started. I'm going to throw this over to Martin and I'm going to let him get us started. So Martin, take it away.
Let me explain a little here, and I won't actually. I'm just want to kind of set the ground rules here. So the idea was, I was thinking, I once did a History in 5 Songs audio podcast episode called Snow Globe Bands, and I think I delved into this topic a little bit then. The idea is, are there bands out there that have shaped your life philosophy? Like literally, I'm going to try to get through this intro without naming a single band, because I really am just trying to set the stage and not go into my part of it. Are there bands out there where, you've listened to them a lot, they've got a certain lyrical world, they've created, like I say, a snow globe, like shake up the little snow globe. It's like a hermetically sealed environment where they've created a world rather than just being kind of random about things and just a band you like because they're a musical band. Are there bands out there that have kind of they seem to have some sort of a advanced package of a life philosophy or certain characteristics to what they do that has affected your life philosophy? And in parallel, I want to say that there's a lesson version of the word philosophy, and that's personality. So maybe these bands have not so much gotten into the DNA and the fiber of your actual life philosophy, but they might have tweaked your personality a little bit in one way or another. They've made you more literary or angry or depressed or cynical or happy or generous or whatever, right? So have they done that to you a little bit, and why? What is it about this band that does this and not others? And as proof it's a strong topic, I often find this with topics as proof that it's a pretty strong topic. I have tons and tons and tons of bands where I could say, love this band. They've really not affected my personality or my life philosophy. So there's lots out there that don't, right? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Phil, and Phil can, expound on that and start throwing in maybe some examples.
Yes, thanks so much. Great to be here, guys. Thanks for having me. It's great to be in your company to discuss this topic, which is really fascinating because, as you more or less said, Martin, it's not so much about your favorite band or about your favorite lyricists. Some of the examples I have today are maybe some of my favorite lyricists, but it is more about the snow globe, as you mentioned, and this kind of attitude towards life or towards certain life issues that have to do with the kind of philosophy that you might have that you follow. In my case, it's more about a certain philosophy that exists consistently in the world of this band and or artists, and which often I identify with, or which generally moves me very deeply, and which is essential to my enjoyment of their music. I think I'll go first with something that is a bit controversial and very political, and I'll go with Pink Floyd, and especially with Roger Waters. He is one of my favorite lyricists, but more I'm really interested in his approach to certain matters and issues which are very important to him and to me personally as well. I'm gonna try not to be too political about this, since we all know that Roger is very political, and he has gotten himself into a lot of trouble, and he has created a lot of controversy with his attitude. But I do have to say also that the man is really true to what he writes, into the universe and the philosophy that he has conveyed to us fans and audiences. As we all know, he's a political activist. He's very much on the left, on the radical left. He's very vocal. He's been very vocal about Julian Assange and about anti-imperialism and all that. And I've made some notes here about trying to summarize his philosophy and why it personally interests me, and it's very important to me as well. And I write here that it's very much, especially, you know, from Animals and The Wall and later on into his solo career, the approach and the philosophy is very much about dedicating your life and your art to the anti-war movement, being anti-war really as a life philosophy. I think that Waters, you know, he really is a beacon when it comes to being anti-war. So many bands and artists are anti-war, but I think that Waters really has brought this to the point of it being really a life philosophy, not just merely a theme that is consistently featuring in their lyrics and in the music. You know, it's a life philosophy that has to do with being a radical leftist against all forms of oppression and imperialism. It's something that we see not just in his lyrics, but also in his concerts, which are, you know, almost like an event, a political event, almost like a rally, if you like, against oppression, imperialism, war, etc. Either, you know, 30 years ago, or even if it is in his most recent tour. It has to do with a philosophy of not being afraid to be political and to be very vocal and to be indeed anti-establishment, no matter how much that might get you into trouble. And in addition to this, as we all know, because of his painful family history of losing his grandfather and father in the war, it has to do with a philosophy of remembering the past and the lessons of history in order to become a more conscientious and active member of our society. It's about never turning a blind eye to injustice. And this is true in his lyrics. It's true in his activism. It's something that we see in his concerts. And, you know, I might mention here, for example, from one of my favorite solo works of Waters, as I call it, the final cut. For me, it is for many, it's a solo Roger Waters album. And, you know, he writes here about how Brezhnev took Afghanistan and Begin took Beirut. And then he writes about how Galtieri took the Union Jack. And then he mentions his favorite villain, who was Margaret Thatcher. And he mentions how Maggie over lunch one day took a cruiser with all hands, apparently to make him give it back. And I always love how part of his philosophy, his approach to these matters, which are very important to him, there's always a lot of sarcasm, a lot of irony, that kind of slight Britishness, which I like about many of these artists. And then, you know, you have a song like the Fletcher Memorial Home, where he talks about colonial wretches, overgrown infants who have to be taken to some home, a little place of their own, a place for incurable tyrants and kings. And then finally, if I can also mention, in his most recent album, I know one that, Martin, you appreciate very much and which you have mentioned often that you love to death, Is This the Life We Really Want? Weird title for an album, but nevertheless, again, it's all about his life philosophy, his approach to oppression, imperialism, politics. And he writes about things like, so as an example, your CNN, I mean, it's story after story after story is bad. And the other thing, chaos, there's zero chaos. We are running, this is a fine-tuned march. Every time a student is run over by a tank, every time a pirate's dog is forced to walk the plank, every time a Russian bride is advertised for sale, every time a journalist is left to rot in jail, obviously referring to Julian Assange. These are lyrics which are very important to me. I find a lot of myself and my own beliefs in what Waters writes, in his own life philosophy, in his activism, and everything that he does. I myself am very political on these things. And what else can I say? I mean, it's very refreshing for me to see someone who is so adamant on these matters. And I think that the music also reflects it. You know, you see, especially his solo career as it is now, the music has become more melancholic, more deep, more minimalistic almost, as though to reflect where he is standing right now as an individual, as a political person on the left, but also very much disillusioned with the world and the life we have right now. So that's my first choice, Roger
Nice.
Waters, and life philosophy of being anti-war and radical, I guess.
Okay, cool. Wicked.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow. What a
All
way to
right.
start off. Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
So,
well.
so Parish, let's turn it over to you.
Well, I have to say, after saying I'd come on here and join, I then realised it's actually a really difficult subject. And particularly when most of the bands I like, I don't really listen to the lyrics, which is probably just as well. So I thought I'd come at it slightly differently and look at it at life philosophies that I hold, both at home and at work, and then bands that reflect and maybe tie into those philosophies. So a slightly different approach, which isn't particularly lyric based. So what I'll do is I'll start with the philosophy, and then I'll talk about the band that's I sort of can associate with the philosophy. And the first one is the philosophy of you make your own luck in life. That by things that you do, you put yourself in the right position. Lots of people have said to me over the years that I'm very lucky, and I always think of that adage that actually the harder I practice, the luckier I get. So I don't particularly believe in luck. I think it's circumstance that leads to it. And to support that, I'm going to go with a band that you probably wouldn't associate with life philosophies unless your philosophy was one of it doesn't matter if you can't spell. and that is the band Slade.
Yeah.
And so why have I picked Slade for this? Well, back in the early 70s, Slade, certainly in the UK, were absolutely huge. 17 consecutive number ones. 20 consecutive hits, 6 number ones, 3 straight in at number one. And then in 1975, they decided to go across to the States and spent 2 years touring the States to no avail. And then they came back, and for 3 years, they had what's generally known as the wilderness years, where nobody wanted to know them. The clubs that they were playing were really small, and that's kind of when I got to see them live. Was at those small clubs. And then in 1980, Reading Festival had a number of sort of heavy rock bands, most of the new wave of British heavy metal. And one of the bands that had been selected was Ozzy Osbourne's Blizzard of Oz, who pulled out at the last minute because the band wasn't ready. And somebody, and I think it was Ozzy, but I might be wrong, suggested Slade. But at this point, Slade were breaking up. They'd effectively stopped. Dave Hill, the guitarist, was actually using his Rolls Royce that he had from his heyday as a wedding car to chauffeur people for weddings. And when they were approached for the gig, Dave Hill actually declined it and said, "No, we're over. We don't want to do it." But luckily, the manager, Chance Chandler, persuaded him that it was better for Slade to go out on at a concert that would be to 50,000 rock fans than just to fizzle out as a forgotten band. So they did the concert, and all over the press the next day in the music press was how lucky Slade had been at the festival because they stole the show. My comment would be, I don't think it was luck. I think they spent 5 years in obscurity honing their live show to the point that they were probably the best live act in the world at that point. They had nothing to lose. They could have declined it, but they didn't. So they got themselves on that stage on that day. And actually, even now, people talk about it as the best comeback ever. I do quite a lot on Twitter, and I'm frequently talking to people who were there on the day. I unfortunately wasn't, but were there on the day, and say how they basically stole the show and blew everybody else off stage. So I believe they made their own luck. I don't think it was luck for them. They made their own luck by, as I say, the years of touring, and they made their own luck by putting themselves there. And by doing that, they then had a comeback. They had a period in the early 80s where they had a number of top 10 hits, a number of top albums, and went back to selling out sort of venues of the size of Hammersmith Odeon and bigger, having previously been basically playing shoeboxes. So by putting themselves in that position, that bit of luck, as people called it, actually relaunched their career. So that's why I picked Slade as the band that I think typifies for me the philosophy of you make your own luck in life.
Okay. Very cool. Very cool.
That's excellent.
Well, let me go with one here. I mean, I'm I don't know where this is all going to lead, and we'll wrap it up when we get to probably an hour, because I'm sure we've got a lot to talk about. But I I basically ended up with a whole bunch of names of bands that have partial things about them, and they may not be my life philosophy, but I can see how they've shaped a lot of different fans in their careers. But I'll start with one that's actually I didn't pull out the CDs for it, but one band that I think is almost the tightest for this topic out of everybody I've got an example here is Motorhead. I really feel like Lemmy, because you've got this great lyricist, he's an underrated lyricist. He's written all the lyrics all the way throughout. They're great lyrics, and I just keep playing all those recent albums over and over and over again. Basically, I just wrote this somewhere how, it was in a Goldmine thing, where said if I only got 12 more albums to listen to for the rest of my life, I could take the Motorhead catalog from Bastards forward to the end, and that would be enough. And you definitely see a life philosophy in there out of Lemmy. You get this outlaw, the loner, doesn't want to get tied down. You think of him living in that cluttered apartment in Hollywood, and it's like he doesn't even have a Hollywood state of mind. It's just a place to hang your hat between, being the vagabond. You think about his heroic approach to how kind of like a non-sellout band they are, and how good they were throughout all those albums and how many albums they made. And you think of him as this guy who's done a lot of drugs and done a lot of drinking, but you can see him, and he even says it in the lyrics sometimes about, sitting down and reading, right? And all the war history stuff that he's into, right? But everything, no matter what topic he's sort of addressing, there's spokes to a central, hub of the wheel about a personality and a philosophy of life that he has about, don't let the bastards grind you down, and you're on your own path, individualism, playing the outlaw. He's got this strange sort of cynical philosophy about, you can tell he doesn't know if he's one of the bad guys or one of the good guys, but he's just going to kind of be this weird version of selfish, but then he's empathetic about the whole world at the same time. So it's one of these things, and you see it in the fan base, and you see it when they're on tour. It's like Lemmy is bolstering people's survival mechanisms by just living and being Lemmy, dressing the way he is, and being that front man and that voice of his and everything, right? Mm-hmm. So I think he is a walking philosophy. He's a walking credo. He's some of my other examples lean more towards you would use the word cult. But with Lemmy, it's more like he's just like an inspirational speaker. But it's very subtle. It's through these lyrics. It's through walking the walk and just being the band he is and the guy he was. So I think people just draw a lot of their inner core, their spine from the example of Lemmy. So that's what, and I want to say that in a much more subtle way, and this is kind of really getting a little weird on this. I've had this talk with a lot of people. Who was I talking to recently about the difference between Anthrax and Overkill on the East Coast, and then Testament and Metallica and Slayer and Megadeth on the West Coast, right? There's something inspiring and salt of the earth and more mature and grown up about Overkill and Anthrax. As I get older and older, I'm more into what they're doing and saying. And I almost think I almost put Overkill and Anthrax, their whole lyrical thing, the whole musical thing, their approach to their relationship with heavy metal, it just seems to be a lot more mature than what you get on the West Coast.
Martin, do you think maybe that Overkill and Anthrax are maybe in some way more blue collar and less corporate?
Exactly, and linked to punk, and linked to a tough, tight, dense urban atmosphere too. Like New York is just a whole different, grittier idea, right? It's a non-car culture, that whole thing, right? So I'll because I don't want to name all these bands, but I wanted to add in Anthrax. Well, I'm going to add in one more: Anthrax, Overkill, and Clutch. I almost put all of these bands somehow in this got a spine, salt of the earth, just kind of like inspirational speaker sort of bands that you normally wouldn't put with that. Living, almost proving their point through quality, walking the walk, just being absolutely quality in everything they do. So yeah, Overkill, Anthrax, Clutch, and Motorhead. I got a lot more to say, but I'll stop there so I'm not hogging the whole thing. So Rand, you didn't hear my original rant to start this whole thing off, but I think you're getting an idea now. So the idea is we're just saying what band has kind of changed or altered or tweaked or just moved the needle on your either your philosophy or your personality one way or the other, and why.
Okay. How many are you doing?
Well, I don't know. I guess we've changed the rules a little bit. We're going to do one and then go around until we've made it.
We're talking an hour, Rand.
45 minutes or an hour, yeah.
I've chosen 3, so is that okay?
Give me one.
Okay, well, it starts with me with this band here. Let me see. I got to turn my light on so you can see. Takes forever for the switch to come on. I don't know what's going on with the switch. Come on. You know you love me. Come on. It gets worse every time.
Say the name. Just start talking.
The Beatles.
Okay.
This is my favorite Beatles album. And because I really, really love psychedelic music. And this is, to me, the birth of probably progressive rock, I guess. But Eye on the Walrus is just, it moves me, even though I wasn't much of a Alice in Wonderland fan. Lewis Carroll. Lewis Carroll, yeah, that's his name. I never really even read it, or whatever. But just this music started me off with Meet the Beatles. I grew up with these guys, started with 11 years old, and they became friends to me. I bought their music. I wasn't buying anything else. It was just this. So by the time this came around, it's just like, oh my God. And to move things a little faster here, it ends with All You Need Is Love on side 2. And I mean, that's pretty much the philosophy that I live my life by. I care about everybody, and I don't want, like, Philip up there, he was talking about Roger Waters and his anti-war stuff. I was in the United States Air Force 50 years ago, and I was against war when I was in the Air Force. And we were talking to people young kids that were coming back from Vietnam that were flying jets over there, dropping napalm on people who never heard us. And I was just like, this is just so weird. I can't even believe this. But I didn't want to get drafted because there was a draft at the time. So I joined the Air Force. But if it wasn't for the Beatles and the Moody Blues and, bands like that in those days, I don't know what I would have done. They literally saved my life.
All You Need Is Love, Rand.
Yeah, I know.
Love is
and
all you
also,
need.
I became a musician because of the Beatles. I saw them on Ed Sullivan, and I wanted to emulate them so bad, and I did as best I could.
Wicked. Excellent. Well, Grant, what do you think? Can you wade into this?
Well, I was actually going to say what Rand was going to say, kind of. So now I have to rethink everything. But I just want to make a jump onto something you were saying. You were talking about Anthrax and East Coast, West Coast. And what came to my mind is some of these bands that push the boundaries and really don't care whether they are going to have a hit single. They do what they do. They're true to themselves. And one of the bands that comes to my mind that I think that really portrays that well, there's a couple of bands. Talk Talk, because if you look at Talk Talk back in the early 80s, producing a lot of great pop stuff. But as they kept continuing on to their career, by the time they got to their last record, it was avant-garde, it was out there, and they really didn't care. They just didn't care. I think it was masterful. And I look at Radiohead the same way. It's just like they started out, you've got Creep, and every album now it's practically ambient music that, I listen to it and go, well, okay, but they're being true to themselves. So it's almost that kind of philosophy. You have to really look to these bands that just don't care and they are true to themselves. So you have to be true to yourself and do what you do and follow your passions and just move forward.
Well, that's kind of the point of this theme is almost like Tom York probably inspired a lot of people to take up a career in the arts, right? And to be artists, right?
Yeah. I think Talk Talk was the Radiohead of the 80s. No one says that, but there's a lot of parallels between both of those bands if you look at it. So, yes, and Tom York, think of the influence. They have people that just, it's kind of like the Grateful Dead. Look at the Grateful Dead, how the following.
One of my examples, I was going to mention them, as a next example, right?
Either you like the Dead or you don't like the Dead, but the people that follow the Dead, and they still follow them. You know what I mean? Jerry Garcia was like a guru. So,
well, yes, exactly. It's a clear example of a body of work affecting your personality and turning you into a certain type of person. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Phil, do you want to venture another example?
Yes, thank you. I do have a few more. Rand, that was a very moving statement and story. And I also want to say that now, hearing about inspirational talks by Lemmy, I'm picturing Lemmy giving a TED talk. Anyway, some of the things that were mentioned are a good segue to quickly, I don't want to spend too much time on them because they've probably been mentioned way too much ad nauseum on their lyrical content, and that, of course, is Rush. I do want to focus on the later period of Rush from the 90s, possibly, and onward. Of course, it's been mentioned many times that the lyrical universe and the philosophy that existed in the world of in Rush was very much about the individualism. Martin, I've heard you mention a few times about Ayn Rand and Neil Peart. Although, again, Neil Peart was not this kind of individualist, neoliberal, neo-Thatcherite, whatever. He did have a lot of empathy for the world, as you mentioned about Lemmy. But, from the 90s and onward, I really have this, what I see in Rush is a very almost Nietzschean philosophy of there is no God. We live in a godless universe, but there is man. There are human beings, and there is the chance to have contact and meaningful contact with other people from whom you can gain respect. And those are, in fact, his closing words in Clockwork Angels with the garden. And, where he writes that the treasure of a life is a measure of love and respect, the way you live, the gifts that you give in the fullness of time. It's the only return that you expect. There's the opportunity of having meaningful contact with other people, but nevertheless being very much solitary in possibly a lonely life, which, we know that Neil Peart largely had one due to all the tragedies that befell him. I picture this ghost rider, right, on heading towards the sunset, but alone, lost in his thoughts. And I have also this amazing lyric from in Snakes and Arrows, the song Bravest Face. I think it really summarizes this Nietzschean philosophy of there's no great thing in life, there's no God, etc. Again, Nietzsche, but there is something at the core of that which is meaningful and which can make us very empathetic. And he writes on Bravest Face, in the sweetest child there's a vicious streak, in the strongest man there's a child so weak, in the whole wide world there's no magic place, so you might as well rise, put on your bravest face. And I think that this really summarizes the philosophy at the core of Rush from the 90s onward, where the music becomes also kind of more heavy, a bit darker, very grounded, down to earth, not so complex as it used to be, very realistic, as though looking life straight ahead without any pretense, but accepting and embracing what is great about it and going for it, So it's not nihilistic, in fact. It's a very positive philosophy, and that's what Nietzsche was about as well. He was actually very positive despite all the bleak things we associate with him. I'll leave it there.
Nice. Yeah. It's true. And Rush is, great stuff on atheism and speaking up and participating in the world, and also more like walk the walk, be productive, do your practice, put in the hours, be a serious band. So you definitely, I've been to many Rush cons, and you definitely see Rush fans have this characteristic of being very high functioning individuals. Right. They're very engaged with the whole literary side of the band, and a lot of them are musicians, and they've got good jobs. They seem to be just fine, upstanding, responsible people. Right. So you can definitely see, the whole story of Rush really tweaking people's personality in basically a positive way, I would say. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
All right.
That's a good one.
Parish, what have you got? Anything else?
Yeah. Okay. For the next one, I mean, for me, a really powerful life philosophy is the importance of family and friends. Certainly for me, almost everything I do revolves around my family and friends. So I wanted to pick a band that reflected that. And I thought there must be lots of bands that are almost like a band of brothers that have been together for a long time. But when you look, there's not as many as you might think. There's trios, so you've got, say, ZZ Top, or you've got Rush, but maybe it's a bit easier with a trio. Even that maybe a bit more recent, you'd have Muse. I mean, you think of them as a recent band, but they're still sort of 20, 25 odd years, so still a long time. I then thought about other bands like Cheap Trick, but obviously with Bunny Carlos more recently, that maybe isn't the case. I thought about Aerosmith, but then of course there was the problems in the late 70s. And then I thought, actually, I'm going to go with this person. And I say person because it's a solo artist. And normally with a solo artist, they work with lots of musicians. Every album they'll bring together session musicians to work with. And I think it's very rare that a solo artist will work with essentially the same musicians for 40 years. So the person I've picked is Bryan Adams.
Wow, nice.
And I went with Bryan Adams because his guitarist, Keith Scott, has been with him since 1976, on record since 1983 with Cuts Like a Knife, so that's 40 years. Mickey Curry, his drummer, has been with him since 1982, and the only odd time then he's not had Mickey Curry, he's had Pat Stewart, but both for the Reckless tour, and then more recently through COVID. So that's nearly 40 years apart, but he sticks with the same guy. And then he's only had two bassists in 40 years, Dave Taylor followed by Norm Fisher. So for a solo artist to stick with the same core band for over 40 years, I think is very unusual. I thought that sort of summed up this kind of band of brothers, my philosophy of family and friends. And it even extends to writers that he's worked with. So Jim Vallance, Matt Lung, he's worked with for over 30 years on songs. So it's not just the band. He does seem to surround himself with friends that he works with, which on his latest album, same people that he's been working with for 40 years. So I just think it's unusual for a solo artist to work like that, and certainly ties into my life philosophy of the importance of family and friends.
Nice. Very cool. Very cool.
That's an interesting, it's just kind of, that's an interesting topic on its own, because I was just thinking Kim Mitchell, Pi Dubois, that songwriting partnership, that all those records, all those Max Webster albums that he helped co-write,
Yeah.
That's an interesting topic, Parish.
All right, I'm going to go with one here quickly, and again, I'm going to fold three bands into this. Boy, I've never thought I'd be having this discussion, but Stranglers, Blue Oyster Cult, and Voivod. Now, why I would pick this one is I would say these three bands together have a similarity in the way they've affected my personality in terms of interests, right? So I'm a big conspiracy theory guy, UFO, the occult, bikers, everything these guys sort of talking like Voivod. Voivod is more like an interesting running concept album sort of thing. It's a life philosophy. You got Snake's life philosophy of being like a French punk rock guy. You've got Michel, he's French too, but you've got the, growing up in Chicoutimi thing. You've got this whole story he's doing where there's fear of nuclear war and environmental disasters, but it's a big sort of space thing with aliens and spaceships and stuff. Blue Oyster Cult, a lot of the same sort of things. You got the whole Imagino saga, which I've written a whole weird conspiracy theory kind of book on, a lot of alchemy in there and a lot of the occult and a lot of history and the occult origins of World War I and all that. So I've gone down that complete rabbit hole because of Blue Oyster Cult. I'm even doing the second book, and it's even crazier than the first book. It's the weirdest thing I've ever done. But so them, and then I figure, Stranglers is kind of the same thing. So it's all very dark and moody, and there is UFOs and occult, and there's even a French connection with Jean-Jacques Brunel and his French torch song sort of thing. There's Hugh Cornell, he was Cornwell was dark as well, and then Baz is in there, and he's kind of like the Hugh figure in the band. You've got the Radivus Radis Norvegicus sort of thing, but just kind of like an interesting fatalistic sort of dark noir humor to them, and you get that in Blue Oyster Cult, and you get that in not in Voivod so much. Clutch even has an overlap with this too. So to sum up, I know I'm trying to explain this as quick as possible. I could probably go on forever and it would come out clearer. But the whole idea is that references that all these bands might bring up, or interests that they had, or things they did with their album covers, love all their album covers as well, have affected things that I would go off and read or get into or watch YouTube videos on or whatever, and be inspired to write about and possibly think about doing fiction. Like the whole Imaginos thing I did is kind of like a speculative fiction, speculative history, alternate history sort of thing. So it's inspired me in so many ways that way. But I'm just inspired by I guess the whole package of the half dozen main topics that these bands have, and that would include Clutch. So Clutch, Stranglers, Boister Cult, and Voivod's a little tighter in their topics, but the whole sort of package of the things that inspire their lyrics are all the same things I'm into as well. So that's a way that they've affected me. So wow, I'll leave it at that and turn it over to Rand.
I'm just going to say real quick, could you put Martin, could you put probably Ghost into that category too?
Yes, definitely.
That's what popped into my head. So I know, throwing it out
and
there.
And the aesthetic as well. And Ghost, you go down to Ghost and boy, this kind of overlaps with another one that I had, but you go down the aesthetic end with a lot of these bands too. And you can have a whole life philosophy that affects the way you dress, your own fashion sense, the way, because one of mine that I was going to talk about, maybe I will if I have time, but it'd be a brief one, but Typo Negative, right? Typo Negative is a snow globe band. It's a cult. Basically there's an entire life philosophy. You could take all those lyrics and create a Necronomicon or an alternate Pete Steele Bible out of that. Just same way you could do with Lemmy. I mean, Lemmy, you could do that as well, but Typo Negative is more of like a cult that has a whole, that neon green and black aesthetic, the whole New York thing, the whole weird buzzy sound that they do, their production and the look of the guys. It's it's kind of like a tough gangsterish looking goth look to them. So yeah, so Ghost made me think of that as well. And maybe leaning a little more into what bands might have affected women and girls. You might go a little bit more to the fashion end. Like you could see there's lots of examples out there how a rock star's or a pop star's fashion sense has affected their fashion sense and has probably altered their personality a little. They want to be like Madonna or whatever, right?
And while I have this thought, since we're having a conversation, Sisters of Mercy, The Cure, that whole goth movement, think about the influence that has had. And still, you go to, when I visited, when I was in Atlanta, like in November, you still saw a lot of goth kids running around. It's still a big thing, but that's
a graphic example of this topic. It's like, boom, that person looks like Robert Smith.
Exactly. Yes. All right, Rand, you're up.
Well, I was going to do something before this one because I grabbed the wrong prop. So I'm going to wait on the next one to get the right prop. So I'll do this one. Does that make any sense? No,
sure.
Of course not.
Well, Rand, it makes sense. So we're okay with that.
Oh, wait, let me see.
Oh, I knew yes was going to come up.
Yeah.
This album, I can't even explain how important it is. I mean, in 1974, it was literally, it wasn't controlling my life, but I was like trying to be worthy of the album. Does that make any sense?
Sure.
There's lyrics that John Anderson came up with in here that, everybody was saying, what do you, after Close to the Edge, what he thinks he's going to, the next thing he thinks he's going to do is the Bible. And he goes, well, why not? And so he comes up with this. And him and Steve Howe just poured their heart into it while they were on tour. And they created 4 massive pieces of music that have moved me to this day. I mean, I love this album. It's so good. And the things they say in it, it's like, you hear people always saying, like, that are really big Christians, that carry Bibles and stuff, and they'll go, well, the Bible says this and the Bible says that. How many people have ever come up to you and said, Tales from Topographic Ocean says this, and Tales from Topographic Ocean says that? Nobody, right?
Yeah, I've never
But
heard that.
it is kind of the same thing, because I've always thought, because I've done my church time and stuff, I've always thought that book is individual as a fingerprint. It's going to mean something different to everybody. This is the reason no one can agree on anything in the book, because everybody sees it in their own way. It's a matter of perspective. So it's the same with this album.
Same with the Yes catalog, Rand.
I could walk. I'm going to go see Yes on Halloween night. Now I'm going to go in Napa, and I could carry this down in front of the front row before the band starts playing and ask every fan, what does this mean to you? And I guarantee you, I could get 50 different answers all the way across on the seats.
That's cool. Yeah. That's wicked.
It's individual. And John was asked, he goes, what is it about? And he goes, it's about whatever the listener thinks it's about. And I went, yes, that's the best answer he could have given. Because if you give away what you were thinking, then you're influencing what everybody's going to think when they listen to it. And that makes no sense.
Interesting.
I'm getting a rush just talking about it, but
I can tell.
I love Yes. I mean,
that's very cool.
Beatles,
Yeah, and that's it totally on topic too. Exactly.
And the Beatles connection to Yes is very magical, because the very first Yes album, they do a cover of Every Little Thing, and they blow it out of the park. I mean, that's the best cover I've ever heard in my life by anybody. That it just kills.
America too.
And then I can check this out. On the Yes album, they talk about John Lennon in Your Move. They always say, give peace a chance at the end of the song, except for on Yes songs. For some reason, they don't do it there. But then it turns out Alan White is playing with John Lennon on Imagine and stuff. And we met Alan. I met Alan White in 2001, and he told me and my friend that John Lennon really liked Yes. So it's like, and then in Mind Games, he says, yes is the answer. And you know that for sure. Well, all the Yes fans like me are going, yep, that's true.
Cool. Excellent.
It all comes back. Yes, people.
It all comes back to Yes. The Beatles. They just like when the Beatles break up at the same time I'm getting into Yes. It's about the same time. It's a year or so off, but I mean, it's just what this stuff means to you, and how you shape your life to an aspect of how you want to live it, and use this as a guideline, or the Bible. I mean, I'm not saying that people who live by the Bible are wrong or right or whatever. I wasn't born to judge like that. I just know what I can use to make my life better. And I love the Beatles, and I love Yes.
Nice.
Well, Rand, let me ask you this. Don't you think that Yes, a lot of the Yes albums have a certain message, or they reach fans differently? Because you can talk about different periods.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a certain period where that period talks to them.
And there's 4 singers too.
Yeah. And I think that, agree.
Or 3, I mean. 3 different singers. Excuse me. Yeah.
But
John
in a very
Anderson,
huge general sense, I mean, it's basically very, extreme, hippy dippy, religious, spiritual, all over the place, multidisciplinary, throughout the whole thing. I mean, John Anderson's sort of it goes into a cult direction, right? But if you don't want to go that far, I mean, they've affected a lot of people's personalities somewhat in the way as being a Deadhead does, right?
Yeah, well, the thing is, when me and my friend Elton first got this album,
John,
on 8-track in Sacramento in 1974, we were driving around in my Volkswagen bus, and we heard that because we met at church, right? So we heard this young Christian see it from the beginning, and we went, whoa, that's awesome. So, when the 8-track clicks and you can start the piece over. So we did that 4 times in a row. We wanted to listen to that. So we didn't even get to the second song for 4 times because we kept repeating the revealing science of God. Nice. And the title of that how ballsy was that to put that as a title?
Yeah, cool.
Well,
listen, Grant is up next, and I want to steer him with a little focus here, Grant. So I'm just going to ask you a direct question.
Go, please. Go ahead.
Okay, so was there ever a band, say, in college that you thought moved the needle on your personality for 2 or 3 years that you just became a fanatic of? Like think back to college, because those are very impressionable years, right? College years kind of thing. Like, was there a big band that you jumped on the fanatical Messiah bandwagon of, and you thought you were thinking a little bit like them for 24 months?
I would have to say the Beach Boys, because I met a guy in college, Tom Smith, who and his brother Sterling Smith, who were like background musicians for Dennis Wilson on his records. So he hung out with Dennis, blah, blah, blah. He had tons of stories. And that was just around the time that I started getting the Brian Wilson thing. And my buddy turned me on to Pet Sounds. So I was looking for Smile bootlegs, and I was Beach Boys crazy, dissecting the records, looking at everything in and out.
But did you think like a Beach Boy?
I wanted to get a surfboard, Martin. I was so into it. So yeah, it affected me that I wanted to surf.
Yeah.
I don't know. This was a tough topic for me.
But did your personality start seeming like it was similar to Brian Wilson's
I
personality?
put a sandbox in my house and played a lot of piano.
Yeah.
No, but I'm trying to get this concept. I get what everyone says, but I don't know if I've exactly had a band that really did that to me.
Well, I'm not going to go on, but I'm just going to mention some names right off that would be my answer to that question.
Okay.
REM, U2, Husker Du, Soul Asylum, The Replacements, Firehose, Minutemen, all of those bands
REM's a good one.
affected my personality definitely for 6 months at a time, or overlapping all at that time. It's like, yeah, I'm more like these guys for a while. Like I was very pliable, I suppose, but all of those bands I felt, yeah, they absolutely changed my personality.
REM was one of those for me too. I thought it's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. And it was when I worked at the guitar stores, the GHS rep turned me on to him. Said, Grant, you like Rickenbacker 12 strings? You need to check this band out. And I picked up Reckoning, and holy crap, it's like one of those things that your whole world changed overnight, because I couldn't believe there was something so great. No one's looking at REM so much now like that, but man, in early 80s, it was great. So that, that really affected me. There were a lot of bands though that did, Cheap Trick. It all comes back to Cheap Trick. Yeah. But I don't know if it's anything that's really affected my physiological approach to anything. I don't know.
Well, okay, so let's go around like just 60 seconds each. Any bands that we didn't get around to that you just want to mention, and just a quick 1 or 2 second elevator pitch why they changed your personality a little bit. Phil, go with you.
Yeah, all right. Let me think here. So this band did change my personality maybe to some extent. I got deep into them and to that universe again. No longer in it, but I'm thinking of the US band Nevermore.
Oh, wow.
Of the great Warrell Dane. Speaking of being anti-war, anti-establishment, this was a band with very aggressive music, aggressive, frustrated music, with a lot of anger, with a lot of almost conveying a feeling of disillusionment, and the lyrical content, the philosophy was indeed very much political, but even more so nihilistic, misanthropic, reclusive. I think that you have to go through that kind of phase before being before being political in a more sober way. And in the lyrical universe of Warrell Dane, who was something of a damned poet of the 21st century, a bit like something, let's say, between Baudelaire, Bukowski, and William Blake, I don't know. There was a lot of hatred, there was a lot of resignation, and of course self-destruction. But in all of that, a hatred towards organized religion, the establishment, etc., there was also great poetry. And that was something that always moves me very much. Yeah, about the lyrical universe of Warrell Dane from Nevermore.
Wicked. Awesome. Okay, Parish?
Well, I'll go back to your question about when I was at college, I think, is probably the best way. And when I was at college, I was new wave and punk, and I was really big into the Jam and to the Boomtown Rats. And both of those, I think, I don't know if I liked them because they tied into my philosophy at the time, or whether they influenced my philosophy, but there was a lot going on in the UK that wasn't good, and that kind of kicked back against society, that sort of pushed back. I have to say, in the example of the Boomtown Rats, I had a strange relationship with them in that I absolutely loved the band, but I absolutely hated the lyrics, because they are actually very depressing. They're about suicide and things going bad. And I really liked the band, but the fact that their lyrics were so depressing really used to annoy me. And I had many an argument with one of my friends who tried to stand behind the lyrics, and I would disagree with them. But as a band, and that kind of kickback at society, there was a lot of bands during that period. But I would say the two in the main would be the Jam and the Boomtown Rats.
Nice. All right. Well, I'll mention one quickly, The Damned, actually, to lead on from you. I feel like I quite like the personality of Captain Sensible. I quite like the personality of Dave Vanium. I certainly like the personality of Paul Gray, right? So and Rat Scabies even, interviewed him many times. I love all of those records and the variety on them, and I basically think that the variety you get on every Damned album adds up to a persona, and then all the records together add up to a persona that is a very cool, complex persona that I wouldn't mind having. I just like their whole attitude throughout that whole catalog. The only other one I had written down here, well, I had King Crimson written down. That's a whole, Rand could probably expound on that one. What kind of person a King Crimson fan is. I mean, a big snobby music snob, standoffish, formal, prickly, but super deep music fan. I mean, there's certain serious, right? Very serious, quite dark. But if there is a sense of humor, it's kind of like a polite, sort of aristocratic Rush sort of sense of humor that you might get out of Adrian Belew. And Smith's Morrissey falls into that whole REM thing in that. So, anyways, Rand, 60 seconds. We're wrapping up.
Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to say the most influential lyrics come from Pete Sinfield.
Okay.
But anyways, you guys ever seen this?
I have seen that. That's
This is the Jimi Hendrix Experience Electric Ladyland Deluxe Blu-ray and all that. This is amazing. This man changed my life because I'm learning how to play guitar. I'm already into the Beatles philosophy and everything. Yes, hasn't happened yet. And all of a sudden I'm learning songs about not taking LSD, but Purple Haze and 1983 and Room, and I Should Turn to Be, and just all kinds of cosmic ideas, flying saucers, the beginning of Axis Bold as Love. It's just right up my alley. And Jimmy just changed my whole life. I mean, I can't say enough about him. He put out 3 albums and dies. It's just, and they're absolute masterpieces, all 3.
Nice. Cool. All right, Grant. Anything you want to add? And
all I want to add are the words of Miles Goodwin that affected me. I like to rock, and that pretty much sums it up for me. That's the philosophy I believe in.
Anybody that could put Day Tripper and Satisfaction going at the same time.
I like them. I like them.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add.
Well, I'll wrap this one up then. So thank you, panel. That was a lot of fun. It was a little more chaotic than I thought it would be, but and I feel like my thoughts don't flow that well at this hour, so I feel like I've been jumbled all over the place. But whatever, that was interesting. We got Definitely. Some deep places with some of that thing. We talked about some things we didn't talk about, but So let us know in the comments below what bands tweaked your philosophy or your personality. And we've got a Ko-Fi. Grant, what are the things we say? We've got a Ko-Fi. We like donations, all that stuff. Join the Patreon thing. You can be on these panels and all that. So. On behalf of myself and our deep philosophical panel, we bid you a good night.
And I have a new album coming out.
Oh boy, ran with the plugs. Yes, he does.
All right. Talk to you later.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.